Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the book launch of my collected poems, Constellations. I'm very excited about it. It's a it's a beautiful book. I don't know if you've seen the cover, um, but I think it's my 24th book, and I think it's the most beautiful of all. And I especially want to thank the brilliant designer, Barbara Neely Burgoyne, who designed the book. It's quite lovely. And my wife, Sarah Longacre, who, when we were traveling in Europe, looked at a lot of cathedral ceilings and saw stars and these beautiful blue shades. And we imagined a feeling, a color that would be like that, and stars that would shine in that celestial way. And I think that Barbara was able to capture that. So I'm very happy about the book. I also want to thank James Long, my editor, uh, who has believed in this project for so many years. Um, one doesn't set out to write a book like this. No, nobody does. It's You start writing poetry, as I did. I started when I was a very young man. Uh, and you write a poem, and then you write another poem. And if you're lucky, you have a book by the age of 24, which I did. You publish that book, and then maybe you publish another book. 5 years later, 7 years later. And eventually, over a period of 60 years, you have 9 books, which may or may not add up to something that you want to call the collected poems. A lot of people are more satisfied and uh, feel more fulfilled with simply a selected poems. And I did publish my selected poems 10 years ago, but it was lacking something. What it was lacking is a lot of the long poems, the narrative poems, the dramatic monologues that had such an important thematic, it played such an important thematic part in particularly my earlier books, the books that I published before 2000. So I'm very, very grateful to LSU and to James Long for believing in this project. It's quite a big thing to put together collected poems. This book is 400 pages long. There were 9 different previous books in different typefaces that all had to be put together, and we had to pick the right typeface, and all of that was beautifully done, and I'm very grateful. So I'm very excited about the book, and I'm going to read some poems from it. Uh, I'm mostly going to read from the new poems. There are 50 pages of new poems, in addition to the 9 books that the first of which was published in 1973. So the book really does cover 60 years of production of poems. Um, it is arranged in reverse chronological order. So the first book, um, the first book is actually in the back of the back of the collected poems. The new poems are in the front. And very appropriately, I think, the first poem of the book is about a person sitting backwards on a train. And I don't like to sit backwards on trains. I like to see things as they're coming towards me so that I can develop the image in my mind. But the idea of sitting backward on a train made a great metaphor for the kind of vision that a person can have late in life of their own lives. The last station. Like a traveler seated backward on a train who sees almost nothing until it's passed him by, he has missed his childhood and his children's. His youth is a blur, and middle age an illusion. And what looms large diminishes rapidly to a vanishing point before he can name it. A forest that never occurred as separate trees. A woman waving goodbye at the last station. Meadows and fields bloom and yield so quickly, the season's colors run together. Even the mountains, much greater than the land, bow to lowly hills that fade away into the sky. He nods to the snow that veils all such dimensions so gently and sleeps, a ghost adrift in drifting snow. The next poem is called Vision in February, and it has to do with aging and how, again, one's vision of the world becomes in some ways more piercing. We see to the hearts of things and sometimes to the souls of things in a way that we certainly can't when we're young. And at the same time, we might overlook the details of reality that cover those things. Vision in February. Under the vault of light blue morning sky, on an ash gray hill, I saw the image of a horse, gigantic, the sinewy neck and flank, and all from mane to hoof, clear cut, cast against the broadside of a barn. This shape loomed before I saw the horse standing below, golden yet trivial. Little was left of winter but bare bones. I missed my parents, long dead, and grieved for my distant children. I saw the shadow of tree trunks and twigs and crows who looked like shadows before I glimpsed the things that posed for them. Such a brilliant morning in late winter, when I saw the stallion's lofty silhouette, I felt like I might ride that shadow into the real world beyond the hill, into fresh wind, midday, and early spring, beyond this melting world into the next. Who have I become that I can see the shadow of the horse, the clouds, the tree, man, woman, all things dear to me before I can see the living things themselves? Who have I become now that the echo of cries and laughter precedes the living voices? What deep valley has created such a chamber? Years have passed since I was on horseback. Surely time has come for me to mount again and spur the horse to a full gallop, clear that split rail fence in the far field, and leaving this body fade into the forest. This is a poem about a silverfish. Silverfish, that's what eats your paper. Silverfish. There's a hole in this page the size of an eyelet. You poke in cardboard to let the sun and moon slip through so you can view the eclipse without going blind. I did not make it. No, the little window was the work of a silverfish. But let's make the most of it to see and be seen as if this was our fondest wish. Hearing between the lines, now I see you. Daydreaming as people do when no one is watching. It is a God's eye view from where I stand, eternity on either hand, and your face before me in a moment of candid beauty, like the cracked seed of creation from which swirled the unity and variety of the world. Most of my poems are fictions. I have a sort of, I don't know what the word is, anti-autobiographical bent. A lot of my poetry has been about other people and about other things. But much of it has been fictional. Um, this particular poem is completely true. Every fact in it is true, and it was written on Memorial Day, um, May 25th, 2020, about someone I never met named Timothy Clover. Now there's a name. What's in a name? Timothy Clover. You'll see what's in a name. I never met Timothy Clover and wondered for years if I'd made him up, if my memory had played a trick on me, or if he had made himself up like a phoenix. He published a poem in our high school literary magazine when I was a sophomore, and then vanished without a trace of his existence apart from the name. What's in a name? In his case, it seems like the perfect poet's name, or the name for the perfect poet, Timothy Clover, a fragrant pastoral image like something out of Virgil, a tuneful shepherd or goatherd. If poets are born and not made, this one, with such a name, was surely born to be a poet. And if the young man made it up, then he was born to make a poet of himself, as most of us struggle to do. Anyway, it was a very big high school, and I never met him or anybody who had. I just remember the evergreen name above the title of a poem and a few lines. Quote, and when she asked me why I was always looking down on these spring days when the sky is so clear and blue, I explained to her that on such days the sky of May or June looks the same from horizon to horizon as we walk under it, while the ground changes at least 6 times. End quote. Timothy Clover wrote that, and I remember it more than half a century later. That makes it real poetry. Whether the youth himself was real or not was a mystery. I imagined him tall and blond and thin, ethereal like a Shelley, his head in the clouds and stars, an ear cocked for the muses who always called on him first. Feet that scarcely touched the earth as he strolled beneath that perfect blue sky of a Maryland spring, an astral spirit. But today is Memorial Day, and we're sheltering in place. Walking under the wide sky of May and looking down upon the delicious changing earth beneath my feet, I think of Timothy Clover. Real or made up? Fact or fiction? With time on my hands, curiosity, and a search engine, I mean to find out. It takes all 5 minutes online. Lionel Timothy Clover, born January 10th, 1947, died May 22nd, 1968. Vietnam War era casualty, hostile, killed in action. Quote, multiple fragmentation wounds, mixed rocket and mortar fire, Tay Ninh province, end quote. In other words, the poet was blown to pieces. A few more clicks, and then I learned he was drafted, left behind a wife and son, 1 year of age. The day of his death was 5 days after the Catonsville Nine, priests and poets, burned the draft files with homemade napalm. The same spring, Martin Luther King was shot dead on his balcony, and race riots set our cities on fire, and students closed Columbia and the Sorbonne. On his tombstone in Fredericksburg, the inscription reads, Lionel Timothy Clover, poet, lived for peace, forced into war. So he did make it up, the name that is, by deleting his first, Lionel, from the Latin, which means young lion. The poems that are best known among the poems in the new book, the new poems were written in the last 10 years since my selected poems came out. The poems that are best known are this sequence of sonnets called The Pandemic, Cruel April, poems from the pandemic. They were written during a 10-day period during the first shelter-in-place orders of the pandemic, April 10th to 20th, approximately, 2020. And I wrote these very quickly. And as soon as I began to send them to friends, people showed a lot of enthusiasm. And one friend of mine who's a producer said, you know, you should hire some actors, put together some sort of production. I said, well, I don't have the facilities for that. But she had a friend who was a director, a fellow named Douglas Trapp, and there were a lot of great actors who were out of work at that time, people like Tyne Daly, Paul Hecht. Everyone agreed to work for free, and so this film was produced, and I encourage you to look at it online. It's very beautiful. The poems are read by these wonderful actors over a montage of art from the Tivoli Gallery in New York. So I'm going to read a few of those. There are 15 in all, but I'll read half a dozen. Prologue. This may have happened centuries ago to strangers who told a different tale of pestilence and calamity on a scale thought unthinkable, then just as now. The April sun rose darker than a crow, and wind out of the east stirred up a gale that blew out lives like candles. Surreal. The song is ancient, tone and tremolo. Listen to me, you stars and daffodils. You are my last and only audience. My voice under the sky against the hills ricochets as it seeks true sound and sense in a world gone mad. My worn heart fills with anguish for our blighted innocence. Virtual reality. The restaurants, bars, and barbers are shut down. Theater, stadium, and concert hall are dark and vacant. An ominous pall has settled upon the country and the town. The tightrope walker and the circus clown wilt in quarantine. Schools and colleges all are closed, and the learning is virtual. The bride is virtual, so is the bridal gown. The flight is canceled, train stalled in the station, and everyone in public wears a mask. Not just the bandit, the nurse and surgeon. You will not see the stranger's face. Don't ask. Things will be done remotely done in a virtual world that takes real life to task. This poem was read so beautifully by Tyne Daly that I hesitate to read it myself, but you can hear her on YouTube, but I'm going to read it. Suppose the time had come. Suppose the time had come for me to die, and death had picked the hour, if not the cause. Headache struck, high fever, and the jaws of double pneumonia wrung my lungs awry. You might call the ambulance, and I would be kidnapped by men in masks because of this pandemic and the civil laws that spare no time for lovers to say goodbye. No room in the emergency room for friends, sons or daughters, husbands and wives. No space in intensive care for the comfort of holding hands or beholding once and for all a beloved face. For you and me, this may be the way it ends. Each of us dying alone in a strange place. Canticle. Canticle. I bring you bay and barley, I bring rue, bay leaves in an amulet to fight contagion, and rue, the herb of grace that saps poison, for magic might, when science falters, do. One man's science is another man's voodoo, when panic rules and faith abandons reason. It snows in June, the lark sings out of season. Time mocks me and all I thought I knew. The bells echo, the church and mosque are empty as body and souls line up for judgment day. Who shall live and who shall pass away? What hymn shall we sing and what words pray Meanwhile, in fond hope and humility, I bring you rue, the barley, and the bay. The Thief. This is read by the late Harris Yulin, who was just an extraordinary actor. And I was very grateful for his participation. I remember having a conversation with him, and he said, because he was 90 years old when he died, and he had an incredible career as an actor. He said that he loved these poems, but they were very, very difficult for him to read. And I know what he means about this particular one, The Thief. Flowers glow in darkness before the dawn, and I'm up now to make most of this day. I'm old and know I cannot stay here with you long before fate waves me on. Old memories come to mind and steal away as light-footed as the doe and spotted fawn. A thief has stolen hours I need to pay family and friends I've loved and known. There was never time enough. Now there's less than there would have been if we were free of this pestilence. A thief whose ruthlessness spares neither beauty, honor, nor loyalty, nor age in its white-haired, valiant helplessness. Love, if you have the heart, what is left of me. And the last poem of the set, and the last poem I'm going to read today, is called A Drinking Song. Shakespeare is dead, and so is the Dead Sea. There is a time and place for everything. Lincoln is dead, his horse, and Warren Harding. Caesar and Marilyn and John Kennedy have joined the chorus, Elvis and Otis Redding. The king is dead also. Long live the king. Maybe the hour has come for you and me. My parents are dead, and many of my friends have paid the debt, checked out, gone to glory. There are few beginnings left me, no end of ends. The song is simple, and I sing it simply. There's time to sing and time to bow to silence. Maybe the hour has come for you and me. Thank you. I would like to hear questions or comments.
Hi, Daniel. That was really wonderful. So thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us and reading from your work. Um, I'm not sure where to start because you've had such a long and storied career. And I did look up, I was counting the amount of books that you've had, and I'm glad that you mentioned that this is your 24th book, because otherwise I wasn't I wasn't sure. It's a lot of books. And you've also written in many genres. You've written essay collections, you've written biographies, you've written plays, and you've also translated plays. So I guess I wanted to start with a kind of biographical question, if that's okay. I was interested, where does poetry fit into your writing career?
It was the first thing that I wrote. I wrote poetry when I was a child. I actually won a Scholastic Writing Award when I was 10. So it will give you an idea of how long I've been writing poetry. So poetry has been the one constant in my writing career for my whole life. And I started as a poet, and at a certain point, I really wanted to write for the stage. So I started writing dramatic monologues, and then I started writing what we called in, the 1960s and 70s poets theater, the poems that were meant to be read by three or four people on stage. And that was a sort of transitional form for me. And then I spent the better part of 10 years writing for the stage, and I still write plays. I had a play produced as recently as last year. So it was poetry first, and then drama. And I was not able to make a living as a dramatist when my family was young and growing. So I started writing biographies, and I was really able to make a career, make a living as a biographer, instead of in the academic world. That wasn't a good fit for me. Uh, Although I'm teaching, actually teaching now and really enjoying it. But biography, I've written a lot of biographies and was well paid to do that for a long time. Um, Other things, I mean, I've written short stories uh, that have been read on NPR. I actually have a news story that's going to be it's a Hanukkah story that'll be nationally broadcast on December the 15th. So I'm still doing that. So I've done a lot of different things and enjoyed all of them. But poetry has always been at the center of my life as a writer.
I wanted to ask you actually about the NPR story that you have coming out. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
No.
That's fine. I guess maybe it's under wraps until the 15th. Okay, how about this? You have done it. You have done this program before. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe how it started or?
Hanukkah lights?
Right, right.
Yes, I think I was one of the first people who was commissioned. Um, the Susan Stamberg, the late and beloved Susan Stamberg, and Murray Horowitz. I actually went to college with Murray Horowitz. Um, had this idea of airing these stories by Shalom Aleichem and Isaac Bashevis Singer and Grace Paley. Um, Poems, excuse me, stories that were classics of Jewish literature, and doing that every Hanukkah, every holiday season. And they began commissioning stories, and mine was one of the first commissioned. It was called The Two Menorahs. And I can tell you about that. It's about two old men who were arguing about how to light the Hanukkah candles, and it's very fun. It's very comic. And it's been wonderful because that, even though it was commissioned 25 years ago, they've continued to air it every few years. So it's become a perennial on NPR. Hopefully the new one will too. And then you can find out all about it.
Right.
Till
I
then,
want I wanted to say hi to Margaret Ann Moore, who is tuning in from East Central Kansas. She commented in the chat. So hi Margaret, thanks for tuning in with us.
hi, Margaret.
I wanted to talk a little bit about like the classics. You have translated, as we mentioned, plays from the Greek and Latin, and there are ample classical references in your work. I'm interested if you had anything that you'd like to say about sort of how what we call the classics, including the stage, affect your poetry.
Oh, the classics have had a huge effect on me. I didn't really study Latin or Greek until I got to college. And then I had a wonderful professor, William McCullough, to whom I've dedicated a poem in the book. And he encouraged me to learn Latin, and I studied Latin with him and with some other brilliant professors at Kenyon College. And I fell in love with the Latin literature, the poets Catullus and Horace and Virgil, and learned a great deal from them about the music of poetry, the meter of poetry. And later, when I was in my late 20s, I had an opportunity to translate a play from Greek, Euripides, the Trojan Women, and a friend of mine, the late William Arrowsmith, who's probably the greatest classicist of his generation, one of the greatest. Um, he invited me to work with a classicist because I didn't know Greek at the time, but I was a poet and a playwright. And he knew that. So the classicist job would be to get the text out of Greek and into a sort of prose uh, version of English, and then it would be my job to turn it into poetry. Anyway, the two of us started working together, and I worked a lot faster than he did, so I got bored and decided that I would learn Greek so I wouldn't need him anymore. And so I hired a tutor and I learned Greek, and my Greek is now far better than my Latin. I just took to it, and um, again, I've learned an enormous amount about metrics and vowel tones and structure from reading Greek and Latin in the original, things I couldn't possibly have learned in English. Uh, Although I mean, I'm very interested in language, and I learned French in order to read Baudelaire, and I learned Italian so I could read Dante, and all of these things uh, have helped me to create the language that I use to write poetry. And I
Mhm.
think anyone who reads the poetry will hear traces of all of those writers.
I have a question for you about the short film that you mentioned during your reading called Cruel April, Poems from the Pandemic. Um, I'm curious what it was like for you to hear your poems interpreted by actors. Did you give them any notes, or did they have free rein to sort of interpret it as they will?
They had total freedom to do whatever they wanted to do. And because I've worked with actors before, I've worked a great deal in the theater. Um, I've learned how to manage the rhythm of a line, particularly poetry, so that there's really only one way they can read it. I mean, there's not an infinite number of ways that they can make those lines work. So it was extremely exciting to hear really a great actor like the Canadian Paul Hecht, or Tyne Daly, who's a great American actor. We had these four very different kinds of actors, and yet they were all reading these sonnets just the way they were meant to be read. Now, I'm not saying that four other actors wouldn't have done it slightly differently, but it was extremely satisfying to hear the music that I had created for the page. It was like listening to a violinist play your violin concerto. It was just an incredibly satisfying thing.
Yeah, they say that it's on two ends, right? It's like the writer has done their job of writing it so that it's interpreted a certain way, and then the actor has done their job of being able to see that and bring it to life. So that makes sense to me. Um, you mentioned that your collection goes in reverse chronological order. You may have mentioned this, but why did you decide to do it that way?
Um, it was it was a very easy decision because I had published my selected poems 10 years before, 2015. And that's, it's a substantial book. It's not 200 pages long. It's certainly not 400 pages long. Um, but I published the poems in exact chronological order, and it went out into the world, and people read it, and they liked it. But I got an interesting feedback from some people, particularly teachers who were teaching the book, and they said that their students far preferred the new poems to the old ones. So the students were starting out at the beginning of the book, just struggling through the first poems, and then just loving the poems towards the end. And I thought, there's a reason for that. There are certain ways in which my poetry has become much more lucid and more clear and more accessible as I've gotten older. So I decided I'm not the first person to do this, by the way, to start the collection with the 50 pages of new poetry, and then let the reader work his or her way back to the earlier books. And I'm very satisfied with that. Of course, people can read the poems in any order, and
Mhm.
they will. I think most people just open the book, read this poem and that, but I don't think that many people who start at the beginning and read all the way to the end. Um, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. And you touched on this a little bit, but I am curious, what is your relationship to your older work like in general? Any sort of I just think that's interesting from someone who's been producing for, you know, a long time and seeing your new work in the same book as your old work. I think for some people they could see, well, maybe that isn't me, or maybe that is me. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about your older output.
It's a very good question. I think that one of the very gratifying things for me was that, and not everyone would want collected poems like that. I mean, there's some people I've been talking to fellow poets who really would prefer just having a selected poems.
Mhm.
Um, but when I started working on this and reading, reading the older poem, reading the poems in my first book, for instance, I did find some of them difficult. Difficult. I mean, there's a poem in my first book called Requiem for Christine Latrobe. And when that poem was first published, it was published in the Michigan Quarterly, and it's a long poem to be published by, a major literary magazine. Published
Mhm.
in in this magazine, and people loved it. And they got all sorts of letters and responses. And I read that poem now, and I think, wow, that's difficult. That's not a poem I would write. I mean, I was trying to write Lycidas. I was trying to compete with Milton's Lycidas. I was 22 years old. I didn't know any better. Um, but still, I thought, yeah, I want that in the book. There's things in that book I couldn't do now. Technically, I just couldn't do it now. So I think one of the gratifying things was that I didn't want to disown anything. I didn't, this is really uh, not every poem I've written it's not a complete poems. It's not like everything is there, but it's, pretty much all of the 9 books, the major stuff. And I feel, I feel comfortable with it.
Okay, so I have a question, but it comes a little context for our listeners. So I recently enlisted Daniel's help in an interview that I'm conducting with another one of our writers who also released a collection of selected poems. And I asked him to help me form a question to ask him as a part of the interview. And I think that it's a great question. And so, and I also think it's relevant to you. So if you don't mind me, I'd like to ask you the same question if that's okay. I don't mean to, kind of pull a fast one on you, but
Demonic.
I
That's
think it's a good
demonic.
question. If you prefer not, but here
No,
you can say
go ahead.
pass if you'd like.
It was for Floyd. I mean, it was for Floyd Skloot. But yeah, but don't share has he had an answer yet?
He has not.
Okay, well,
He has
just
not.
share
So.
your answer.
We can pass if you prefer. If
I'll answer it. What
so I'm gonna ask the question now for our listeners. So do you believe that poetry is inevitably autobiographical? Floyd, if you're listening, please tune out for this portion of the Q&A, and then you can tune in a couple minutes.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's no. I think that Shakespeare's poetry was not. I think I think a lot of T.S. Eliot's poetry was not. Um, I think that a lot of Dante's poetry was and a lot wasn't. Um, so the answer is no. I don't think poetry is inevitably autobiographical. I understand why a lot of people do think that, and I think that that's uh, it's become almost conventional wisdom, among modern critics and writers that it is inevitably autobiographical, but I don't believe it is. No.
I'm going to spare you the follow-up question and save that one for Floyd, but I do have my own follow-up question in a way, which is so nowadays in writing workshops we I feel like from someone who did an MFA, we tend to say the subject of the poem, I felt like the subject of the poem did this. So I'm curious, especially from your response saying that poetry isn't autobiographical, and because of
I didn't say that.
or it isn't necessarily. Isn't necessarily. Excuse me.
Inevitably.
Not inevitably. I'm just interested how you get into a subject from someone who's written, biography and poem. Is there any sort of practices that you have? Is it different for poetry than it is biography?
Uh, well, it's different in that if you choose a biographical subject, I mean, there's certain criteria for me. I have to admire the person. I have to be fascinated by their life. There has to be some mystery about it, about the person's life. And once you make that choice, you live with it for as long as it takes to write the book. In the case of my book on the Franklins, took 6 years. I had to live with that. Um, when I choose a subject for poetry, often it seems almost as if the subject chooses me. I'll become so obsessed with an idea, a concept, a melody, that I'm haunted by it, and I just have to write it. I have to write the poem. Um, but in the case of the longer poems, like um, my poem about the marriage of Henry Adams and Clover Adams, which is not autobiographical. It's not about me, it's about them. And the poem succeeds to the extent that it's about them and not about me. I was just fascinated my whole life by Henry Adams, and what an extraordinary mind and what an amazing life, and how much he made of his experience. So I was charmed by that subject in the way that I was charmed by Bob Dylan when I wrote that biography, and Amy Semple McPherson when I wrote that biography. So there are similarities there.
I would like to ask you one more question. It's our standard follow-up question. Um, so you've just published a book of collected poems. What are you working on right now?
Well, I wrote the story for National Public Radio. Um, I had a play produced in the spring, this past spring, and I was very excited by that. I my tendency, I think, as I'm getting older, is to write less lyric poetry. It took me in 10 years, I wrote 50 pages of lyric poetry. Well, that's 5 poems a year. Um, you know, right now I'm really not thinking much about writing lyric poetry. I do love writing for the stage. Um, I may write another play. One thing I'm really interested in doing is putting together my stories, because I have a lot of short stories now, and I would like to see those collected and published before I check out. Um, so I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking about my essays. I have a lot of essays that I think should be collected. And so there's sort of that kind of housekeeping stuff to do. I'm also teaching right now, which is, I haven't done that in 15 years. I'm teaching a great books course, and it's taking all of my time and energy, and it's wonderful, and I have great students. But I don't have a lot of time for writing right now. But thanks for asking.
Sure. And thank you for being here with us today. And I wanted to also congratulate you on this collection. It's a fantastic achievement. I also wanted to thank everyone in the chat for tuning in and spending your afternoon with us. This is just a reminder that you can get 40% off Daniel's book by using the link in the chat. And that's all for today. Daniel, do you have any closing words before we sign off?
No, just thank you all for joining us and for listening to the poems. And I hope you enjoy the book. I had a lot of fun writing it over 60 years. If you have one-tenth the amount of pleasure out of it that I did, it'll be a lot.
Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next Thursday for our next book release. All right.